What's going on, guys? It's been a long time since we've done one of these. It's been all crazy time. I don't know about that intro. I feel like this channel's evolved. Let me know. So this time around, we're gonna talk about tanks. We have 3 questions that we're gonna answer about tanks. So first up, we have Auggie Lo via Twitter asks, how often should I clean my tank rig? I need maximum consistency. So I don't necessarily know if there's like a specific answer to this question, right? I don't know if there's a specific number of shots you're gonna like only service your regulator at this amount of shots or under a specific number of uses. Because I really do kind of think that matters where you're getting your tanks filled. So me in California, right, the air is super dry and all the paintball fields I play at, and I'll take care of their equipment and their air compressors. So when I'm getting my tank filled, I know that it's dry air that's clean. There's not a lot of just pollutants inside there or humidity in the air. So when I'm putting it in the tank, it's just good, clean air. So when it comes out, it's just air coming out of there. There's not a lot of debris or dirt or dust or whatever inside that bottle. So when I take apart my regulator, for the most part, it's always just clean. There's not a lot of stuff in there. It just could use maybe a little bit of grease and maybe new O-rings. So I find that the grease starts to wear out or go away, and those O-rings start to wear out at about 50,000 to 60,000 shots. So for me, I think that 50,000 to 60,000 works. And I think for most people, that's also a good number. So at about 50,000 to 60,000 shots, maybe taking apart that regulator, putting new fresh grease on, silicone-based grease, it's very important to use silicone-based grease, and maybe installing some new O-rings would be a good idea. So that's, I think, how often you should service and maintain regulators. But if you're looking for the most consistency, I still think that's kind of the answer, right? I don't think that taking apart a regulator every time you play and changing O-rings or putting new fresh grease on every time is a good idea. Because these O-rings and parts and I don't know, the springs and stuff like that do kind of settle into place and over time kind of start to work a little bit better. I mean, we always talk about regulators breaking in and breaking in guns and stuff like that. And it's really the same situation. So allowing that regulator to kind of settle in after I don't know, 5,000 shots or something like that is probably where you're gonna see the best, or I don't know, yeah, best consistency. It's not gonna be soon as you install new O-rings and new grease or whatever. It's gonna be, after a couple uses. So allowing that regulator to work for a while, get that I don't know, tens of thousands of shots, is probably where you're gonna see the most consistency. Imprint asks via YouTube, does having a SLP regulator on your tank affect the FPS on the gun? So what is the SLP regulator? So the SLP regulator is a super low pressure regulator designed by Ninja Paintball to kind of work in conjunction with the Bob Long guns. Bob Long guns from 10 years ago, say the Victory. So those were really super low pressure. They're 300 PSI. Bob Long just found that their guns worked better at that lower 300 PSI pressure. So will it affect the velocity on a paintball gun? Yes and no, right? So say you have a Tippmann 98. The Tippmann 98 works at about 700 PSI, so it will not work at that 300 PSI output pressure. The Tippmanns need that 700 or 800 PSI for them to work. Or say you have a gun like the Planet Eclipse Emek. The Emek only works at 150 PSI. So in theory, you should be 100% fine with the SLP regulator. But let's say you have the Emek and you have a 48 3000 compressed air tank. That 3000 compressed air tank, the aluminum tanks, output around 700 PSI. So the Emek's gonna work fine at that 700 PSI. The gun works, fine, right? But then say you take that aluminum tank off and then you put a tank on that has the SLP regulator. So going from that 700 PSI to that 300 PSI, you're definitely gonna see a little bit of a drop in velocity. I said that a little weird. I was gonna say a drop in performance, but I guess that's velocity too. So just going from the gun, 150 PSI, or I should say going from 700 PSI, that tank, to 150 PSI, that's a little bit difficult for that regulator. But when you go 300 to 150 PSI, I mean, just that big drop in pressure is gonna make the velocity drop because the regulator is not used to that 300 PSI input. It was used to the 700. But that's not hard, right? You just change the velocity on the Emek and you're good to go. And it's not a dramatic drop in velocity. I mean, you might see I don't know, 20 to 30 feet drop or something like that. It's not gonna be that dramatic. I think you just, change your velocity. You're probably gonna notice that on all the guns though. So like you have a Mini GS and you go to the SLP tank, or like a CS2 or something like that, you go to the SLP tank. All of these guns, you're probably gonna notice a drop in velocity. So like in both of those situations, right? Like say you have a 98, the tank's not gonna work just because you need more operating pressure, right? Or you got the Emek and we're like moving regulators around or tanks around. We're definitely gonna see a fluctuation in velocity just because we're altering the input pressure. But what we do find is that most guns that are working at about half of the pressure of the SLP reg will work perfectly fine. So a good rule of thumb is that from your tank regulator, you need about double the pressure that the gun works at. So with the Emek at like 150 PSI, roughly, you need 300 input pressure. So the SLP regulator work fine, or like the CS2 or the LuxX, all those guns should work with the SLP regulator. But like I said, it's a good idea, I don't know if I said this, it's a good idea to actually check with your gun manufacturer, like talk to them, email them, whatever it takes. Reach out and just make sure that your gun will work fine with the SLP reg. Because even though I say like you double-ish the operating pressure, sometimes these guns are a little bit funky on that very low pressure. Like the Vanquishes can get a little weird, so just double check. Michael Haller asks, I just got a red GI Sportz 68 4500 tank. And as looking at aftermarket regulators, do you think the Powerhouse regulator is worth the money? So first, what regulator you have? Let's say what regulator you have. So you have a standard GI Sportz carbon fiber tank. I said that weird. And it's gonna have the same regulator as really a lot of the tanks now. So it's gonna have the same reg as the Empire tanks, GI Sportz, Valken are using that same reg, HK Army are using that reg, and even Ninja have started to use that really kind of basic standard regulator. They work fine, right? Like I used one on an Empire bottle for a long time. I didn't have any problems with it. They work. They're very basic. You can't really do anything. There are no aftermarket things or adjustments. It kind of is what it is. And that, I think, is one of the advantages of that Powerhouse rig, right? There are adjustments and features that we're not seeing on these standard regulators. So one of the advantages of the Powerhouse regulator is you can adjust the output pressure, right? You could make it high pressure to work on that Tippmann 98, or you could make it low pressure to work a little bit better on that Emek. You can also adjust or rotate the threads on the top to make that tank align or line up just like you like it. So you could make it have the gauge on top or the fill nipple on top, or really just kind of line up the regulator however you want. And I think what I like probably the most about these Powerhouse regulators is that they're made extraordinarily well. Like just really, really, really good. There are not a lot of other paintball products, I think, in the history of paintball that are made as well. But that's something you're definitely paying for. So the Powerhouse regs are $160. That's just a lot of money, right? Your whole entire tank and regulator was cheaper than that. So it's difficult for me to say if it's worth it or not, just because it's so much money. I think if you like all the higher end features that the Powerhouse regulator is offering, like you want to adjust your tank pressure and you really like the stainless steel stuff and I don't know, you like the low pressure burst discs and stuff, I think it's maybe worth it for you. It's just so much money. If you can afford that $160, go for it. But if you can't and you want some of those features, I do feel like the Ninja Pro V2 reg really offers almost the same stuff, right? You can adjust the output pressure, you can adjust the bonnet to align the regulator up, but it's definitely not made as well. There's no question the Powerhouse stuff is made better, but that's not to say the Ninja tanks or the Ninja regulators are bad by any means. So there's no question they're made better, but I'm not sure if it's performing better. So for me, I don't know if it's worth it. But if you want all those crazy features, it's definitely the best regulator ever made. Well, at least best quality regulator on the market right now. I don't want to say ever, because it was that Air America stuff back in the day that was also super good. Guys, that's paintball question time. The first one in what feels like a freaking year. If you have a question you want answered on this, please leave a comment anywhere you want, like on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I don't know, TikTok I don't think will work. Use hashtag PBQT like that right there. And I'll do like a search, we'll find it. And if your question's good enough, I'll put it on here.